Hello and welcome to the Azure Cloud Chronicles. Today we're going to be talking about Azure Cost Management, Reservations and Savings Plans. I'm Joey D'Antoni and I'm a Principal Cloud Architect.
I'm John Morehouse. I'm a principal consultant with D'Antoni Associates.
All right, today we're going to be talking about pretty common cost savings things. We've talked a lot about, we have this whole series on cost savings. We try to break down Azure into a series of topics. One of the things I always hear people say, there are a couple of things I hear people say about the cloud that are generally wrong. One is the cloud is always more expensive than on-prem. And two is that if you're using things like VMs and disk, you're doing the cloud wrong, that everything should be running as a function as a service, because the developers who say these things never have stateful workloads. But I will say, if you're running workloads on Azure, and we always talk about Azure here at the Cloud Chronicles, but most of this applies directly to AWS and GCP. They're just slightly different. You could be overspending if you're just on pay as you go. You could be overspending on 30 to 70% of cost. So that's what we're going to talk about today: is reservations and savings plans, and like enterprise agreements and stuff like that. Some of that's not gonna matter unless you spend tons of money with Microsoft, but some of it will.
One could argue if you're paying retail, you're doing cloud wrong.
Yeah, I would say if you're paying retail pricing, you're using the cloud wrong. When we talk about reservations, and we're going to go through this in great detail today, you're looking at saving 30 to 70% off list prices. And if you have an EA, the savings you can have are really, really high. And I'm not allowed to talk about some of the savings I've seen, but they're shockingly high. But you have to have real money for that. Like 8 digits in US dollars. Yeah.
That would be real money.
Not in rupees. Sure. Not in rupees. All right, so let's talk about the cost management landscape. Pay as you go is the default. So if you spin up a new Azure subscription today, you put in your credit card, you're paying those retail prices. Never, I don't even want to say rarely, it's never the cheapest option. We'll talk about the hierarchy there in terms of savings. It's pay as you go, which basically you get no savings from retail. Savings plans, reservations, EAs, and negotiated pricing and pricing agreements. The big difference in each of those is you're committing to a spend level with each of those, and that commitment tends to get higher and higher. Savings plans and reservations are somewhat interchangeable. We'll talk about that in terms of like how they're implemented. But you're only committing, when you buy a reservation or commit to a savings plan, you're only committing to buy that specific amount of compute. When you commit to an EA or some of the spending plans, you tend to be agreeing to a specific amount of spend. So you're saying, yes, Microsoft, we're going to spend $15 million with you. And Microsoft doesn't particularly care what you spend it on. I mean, they'll give you some guidelines, like they probably wouldn't be happy if you spend that all on AI, or they might just not have the capacity to service it. But that's kind of how those things work. John, what are the talk about these component prices? So talking a little bit about like shutting down resources versus reservation. I think it's a naive thing. A lot of new cloud professionals will talk about like, oh, we can just shut down resources we're using and we'll save money.
Well, typically if you have a reservation, right?
Yeah.
That reservation is assigned to a particular VM family in a specific region. And if I have a reservation, usually you'll save more money with the reservation than shutting it down.
Yeah. The other point I was trying to drag out of you there, that's great for your personal subscription, and you should, and by all means, shut down things.
Yeah,
when you have like 20 VMs, it's totally possible. When you're in an enterprise, or even when you're in a company and you have 100 VMs and you have developers that maybe are working offshore, you don't know when the business hours are. Like it's just something that doesn't really scale.
That's true.
Yeah, if you have a consistent workload, yeah, you can shut stuff down. But we're going to talk about this more in a little bit about how even when you shut stuff down, like John mentioned, a reservation means you're paying for you're committing that you're going to reserve this VM for 1 or 3 years. But even shutting it down at night, you may still save money over paying retail for that 24 hours a day. And we'll talk more about that later, because that's kind of one of the interesting things. So what are Azure reservations? It's a 1 or 3 year commitment. There was talk that Microsoft was going to do a 5 year commitment at some point, but I think that died. And it's for specific resource types. And let me pull that screen up.
And there's a lot of things you can get reservations on.
Yeah. It is enough that I need to share it on a slide.
And reservations is probably when I talk to clients, reservations is the first thing I tell them to go look at, just because the amount of savings can be very drastic, right? You mentioned up to 70%, 75%. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean,
so this is everything you can reserve. So virtual machines, probably the most common one we see. Storage, you can reserve. The savings on storage aren't that great, and you have to commit to like
a lot,
like
100 terabytes, 150 terabytes.
Yeah. It's you have. Yeah, I could see it for like an enterprise with Azure Files, but outside of that, it's not something I see really commonly.
I don't know.
Cosmos DB, Data Factory, SQL DB, Managed Instance, Synapse Analytics. I think we're still allowed to talk about that. You can also reserve Fabric. I think there are only 1 year terms on Fabric reservations, and it's 50%. Microsoft Fabric thinks it's special and doesn't want to act like the rest of Azure. That's why that's the case. And I probably just got removed from the MVP program. Thankfully, I'm also an Azure MVP, so they won't be pissed that I said that. You can reserve Azure Databricks. I do think the Databricks pricing, you don't get a reduction in the cost of DBUs, which is the Databricks units. I think it's only the compute there. MySQL Postgres, Data Explorer, which is log analytics, dedicated capacity, effectively, Azure Cache, Azure Dedicated Host, which is one of those services that if you have to ask, you can't afford it. Dedicated Host is when you reserve the entire server at Azure. It's commonly used in some SAP implementations. Disk storage, backup storage. I can honestly see backup storage reservations more than I can see blob, because a lot of regulated industries have to keep everything forever. And NetApp files. Yeah, NetApp files has a couple of interesting use cases. It's a really high performance storage subsystem. So one of the things that problems we run into as database professionals is with managed disk, there's just not enough bandwidth to the disk. The disks are plenty fast, but we can't get enough throughput. NetApp files and Elastic both use the network connection instead of the storage connection. So there's more bandwidth available to them. So it's commonly used in Azure Virtual Desktop, and of course for NetApp filers. But believe it or not, I know NetApp traditionally had a pretty bad rep in the database space, but they're pretty good now. So John, do you want to talk a little bit about partial reservations and what that means? If you maybe have a scale set or something that scales out and you have a reservation for enough cores for 5 of the nodes, how's that priced out? Or timing?
For timing?
Yeah. Either way.
So if I have a reservation for a VM family and a scale set, and I scale beyond that reservation, let's say I have a reservation for 10 cores, and I scale up to 16, I would get the savings on that first 10, but then I'm going to pay retail prices on the additional 5 or additional 6. Sorry, I can't math today. So I can still apply that reservation, but anything above that scale set, I would have to pay retail pricing. And then if I scaled back down, then I'd be back down within the constraints of the reservation.
Yeah, and a lot of organizations will have, especially enterprise type organizations, will have dedicated financial FinOps teams that kind of do these things, that evaluate the reservations. One of the things that's kind of interesting is you can scope reservations a few different ways. Just like security in Azure, reservations also have scope. So they can be scoped to a subscription, a resource group, shared across an enrollment or a management group. And having those shared scopes really maximizes this utilization. And that's, if you look at any of the way big enterprises do it, they tend to scale them pretty much across everything, in the notion they have a pretty good idea of what they're going to use, and they want to get everything mostly picked up. So it's a weird thing that is kind of hard to understand. You're not reserving a particular virtual machine. You're reserving so many cores of a virtual machine family, and the same thing's going to apply to like SQL database and all those other things. You're reserving like 8 cores of Azure SQL database general purpose. You're not reserving DB1, right? Like, so that's kind of the trade-off and the understanding there. What about exchanges and cancellations? How do you handle that?
I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah.
Well, and there used to be, you had issues with exchanges and cancellations, right?
Yeah.
That's what I seem to remember back when they first started doing reservations.
So there are a couple of things that are interesting about the history of reservations. When reservations first started, you had to pay up front. Like,
oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. If you wanted to reserve something for 3 years, it was like, all right, pay me. And they were also yeah. And they were really limited in terms of what they could exchange. But I think during COVID, they got a little bit more flexible on that. But yeah, you can, if you cancel, you're subject to up to a 12% cancellation fee. And there's a $50K annual refund limit. You can exchange reservations for different regions and VM families. I think my notes don't have anything about a limit on that. But I think there are some limitations on like what you can do, how much you can exchange, and what you can exchange for.
And it's probably worth noting that you can still pay for it up front, but you also have a monthly option, which is most companies, at least my clients, go with that monthly option.
Well, and an important thing to note, I think this is when that guidance changed. That was in the pretty early days of cloud, and there was like thought that you might be able, from an IRS perspective, to be able to treat that reservation as a capital expense. And the IRS and the general accounting practices people said, no, you can't do that. So therefore, it suddenly became way less attractive to front 3 years of cash to Microsoft. So, John, if you have a reservation, are you guaranteed that VM in Azure?
No, you are not. Great questions. Like we planted that question.
Yeah.
No, and so there's actually a misconception that if you have a reservation that you have that capacity guaranteed, and that's not the case. You can reserve capacity. That's a different thing than reserving the compute.
That really sucks.
That really does suck, and it really comes important when you talk about DR. You and I were talking last week about Azure Site Recovery, and we know people that have failed over in Azure Site Recovery, and they couldn't get capacity in their other region, and they were stuck. So they had to.
But now Azure Site Recovery will make recommendations for other crappier VMs you can use in the same region.
But
that's a new feature.
You're not going to have those crappy VMs.
Yeah. So I think this speaks to a broader problem that we're seeing in mostly Azure, but I see it in some places in AWS too. There is limited capacity, probably. I mean, I don't have to say probably, based on like the last Microsoft quarterly report. Amy Hood commented on this, who's the CFO. They're not building Azure capacity because apparently making a profit margin of 69% isn't good enough. So they're building capacity for AI that doesn't make any money. I don't know much about business, I guess. My MBA is behind me. But that doesn't make sense to me. But that's the situation. You see this acutely in a few regions in the U.S. South Central U.S. is really tight. A very, very large retailer uses that as their kind of home base. East U.S. is tight just because there's so many firms on the East Coast that kind of put stuff there. North and West Europe and the UK regions are also very, very tight. There are places around the world and in the US that have more capacity than others. And like I did try to do a DR test the Monday after Thanksgiving, which was probably a terrible idea, but hey, why not? So yeah, there's no guarantee that buying a VM reservation will get you capacity. Capacity reservation will get you that, and capacity reservations are a little bit different. Capacity reservations do require you to pay for the VM even if you're not using it, which is kind of awesome.
Yep, double the price.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think you get I kind of don't understand the concept of capacity reservations because, just run a hot DR at that point. I don't know what you're saving, but
True.
I'm sure there's something I'm missing. Uh, so,
Sure. I
what
mean,
happens if what happens if your workload changes? Like, for example, you're running your SQL servers on a D series VM because they weren't that intensive, and suddenly you either need more memory or more IO. What's the situation there?
with reservations.
Yeah, with regular reservations.
Well, I mean, you've got instance flexibility. You're gonna have to cut
Yeah,
this out because I'm not sure.
yeah,
I'm not sure what you're driving for.
yeah. Just so you can change those, right? Like you can switch them out.
You can switch out the reservation. Yeah, I mean, you can
Yeah,
exchange the reservation. Is that what
yeah,
you're going
yeah,
for? No, we already
yeah,
talked
yeah,
about that.
yeah, yeah. Cool, cool. So reservations were the first thing. They came pretty early in the cloud era. Later on, we got something called savings plans, and I'm going to share here real quick. And this is the list of things you can get savings plans on,
Which is a smaller list.
which is a smaller list. You'll notice, in in my opinion, a somewhat random list. Uh, you'll see virtual machines, app services, Azure Functions Premium, container instances, dedicated host cropping up again, container apps. So all the container things. I didn't mention this with reservations, but Kubernetes, AKS, is part of this. But you don't pay for Azure Kubernetes services. You only pay for the VMs that are running under your Azure Kubernetes service. So effectively, to get discounts on Kubernetes, you just reserve or put savings plans on your virtual machines.
Well,
Savings plans are pretty similar to reservations in that they're 1 to 3 year commitments, but they're way more flexible. Reservations lock to a specific region in VM series. Uh, savings plans just aren't. And John, can you combine savings plans and reservations together?
you can. Typically, we want to use reservations for a more your more stable and predictable workloads, like my production SQL boxes,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm going to run those probably. If you're shutting down production, I probably want to talk to you about that. But I'm probably going to be running those boxes 24/7,
I
365.
want to know what your app architecture is. That's
Yeah,
kind of new.
I would love to see what your app architecture looks like if you're shutting down your production boxes on a regular schedule. Um, so I would probably use a reservation for those predictable workloads, because I can scope those reservations more accurately, probably, and drive a better savings cost, because reservations I can get up to 75% or 70%, whatever that number is. Whereas savings plans, I usually tell clients like 33, 35% is going to be
Mm-hmm.
your max. Um, so I'm going to want to use something that I can get a bigger cost savings out of. But then I can use savings plans if I have some variable workloads, maybe I
Yeah.
do have workloads that I always think about, like Black Friday, Thanksgiving,
Mm-hmm.
right? Clients that are retail that spin up um, applications or more things during that time period, but then scale them down. Maybe savings plans is a better option for them for that time period. Something that's not as stable or predictable as my production SQL boxes.
Yeah, and so if you had a very small workload, like if you had 3 VMs and you had 2 of them reserved and you had a savings plan for the other cores, effectively what's going to happen is Azure is going to apply the reservation to those first 2 VMs, and you'll get the savings plan for the third. And if you had a fourth VM, you'd pay retail pricing on it. But yeah, you definitely get a little bit more flexibility, just because you're not locked to a region, you're not locked to a VM series at
Totally.
all. So there's a few benefits to savings plans, especially when you don't know what you're doing. Like I do sometimes tend to tell customers that, like, if you're new to this or you're building a new app and you don't know what the workload's gonna look like, maybe do a 1 year savings plan at first, and then once you understand what that workload is going to look like, then build out then maybe go for reservations.
Yeah, and reservations and savings plans don't overlap; they complement each other.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's worth noting, right? I mean, you can't stack them in the same hour of usage, but
Mm-hmm.
you can certainly use both of them, but they just don't overlap.
Yeah, overlap on the same compute on this like
Correct.
same machine. Yeah.
Correct.
All right, let's go to the big money topic of the day. Enterprise
EA.
agreements. Yeah, if you're not EAs used to be kind of far more common, I think, at smaller firms. Probably 10, 15 years ago, kind of pre-Azure Microsoft days, because Microsoft before Azure used to make all their money selling Windows and Office to companies with like hundreds and thousands of seats. Now you could have a pretty small company that generates a metric ton of Azure revenue. So like that's like a little bit of a difference. But with EAs, if you're not spending, I would say $10 to $15 million, Microsoft's not going to want to talk to you about an EA. So these are large volume, multi-year, typically 3 years. So somewhat similar to reservations. Contracts that are negotiated directly with Microsoft, you're going to get a fixed percentage off. You can still kind of combine that with reservations. I've had EA customers do that where they combine it with a reservation, but usually the discounts are high enough that you don't care. And in a lot of cases, some of the enterprise customers I've worked with, they're like, they almost struggle to make the spend. So that's why I've seen some kind of interesting design choices where they'll go for something maybe more expensive than they would have ordinarily expected, because they have to pay for it. Maybe using something like UltraDisk in lieu of premium V2 storage. But these are committed use discounts, custom pricing. I've seen discounts like as high as 40% here, which shocked me because it was like across everything. Not just like VMs, like storage discounts across that were 40%. But at that point, Microsoft's probably losing money on your storage, to be completely honest with you. Just of my brief knowledge of the margins there. So
I
yeah,
don't have a lot of
that's an
clients at EAs.
yeah.
The bigger companies do, the bigger clients, but most of my small SMBs, they don't have enterprise agreements anymore.
I've had everybody I've had who's had an EA has been really, really big. Like one client I had who had an EA was spending $30 million a month.
I had one client that was smaller that had an EA, but they let it go because they figured out that it wasn't worth it. So they went a different route after that EA was up.
Yeah, the savings percentages there, I know I mentioned a really high one that I've seen, but like if you're not spending a ton, you're going to get like 5 or 6%, and it's a lot of hassle to deal with. You can also get a Microsoft customer agreement, and this is probably the more common one. This is just the traditional smaller firms that had EAs. This is where you're going to get kind of a fixed discount. You're not going to necessarily have a spending commitment. You'll maybe get some resources from Microsoft. It's less and less, and I'm going to let John kind of talk about CSPs and DevTest pricing, because DCAC is a CSP.
Yep.
Cloud solution provider.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, so CSP, cloud, sometimes I call it a cloud services provider, but it's actually cloud solution provider. And shameless plug, DCAC is a CSP. And we're usually good with like SMBs, so small and medium businesses, where we can give discounts on Azure resources to our clients. And so one of the things that we can provide is we can actually match EA agreements depending on what the agreement is, in terms of pricing and or discounts. But you can sign up with a CSP. You basically purchase all your Azure resources through that CSP, and that CSP can give you discounts on that resource depending on what it is. The margins vary depending on what you purchase, but one of the things that we do provide at DCAC is we provide support for you. So if you need to contact Microsoft, you can actually funnel that support request through us, and we do that for you. So there's different features each CSP offers, but there's multiple out there. We're not the only ones, but there are those CSP providers out there. But it's a great way to potentially save money, especially if you can't do an enterprise agreement. You can always go look at a CSP, and maybe we can get you discounts on what you need in Azure.
And the thing I'll say about, especially you guys, because I know how good everyone there is, you're not dealing directly with like 8th tier Microsoft support that's outsourced to Bangalore. they do. Like John has to do that. But
Yeah.
if
But you
you
deal
open
with
a
me,
ticket,
right?
yeah, if you open a ticket, you're opening a ticket with John or Denny, and not that they're going to be able to fix everything, because like sometimes it's on the back end, but they might be able to help you solve a lot of problems before you have to deal with Microsoft support. And like if you have an EA and you're a giant company, support can be pretty solid. If you're not a giant company and you don't have an EA, support is pretty actively terrible across the Azure landscape. It's only gotten
And
worse. Yeah.
one of the benefits I think that we provide, you yourself as well, is that we, based on our network, like sometimes
Hmm.
we can get direct access to the right people very, very quickly,
Yeah.
which is beneficial, right? I can call or email somebody and say, hey, we got this problem. Where do I go? Like, who do I need to talk to?
Yeah, and we might not always be able to resolve those for you, but like
Yeah, for sure.
we can at least we can at least a lot of times find out, oh hey, yeah, it is what we thought it was.
Yeah.
And get you an idea on that. Uh, Dev test pricing. This is a
We
pain
might,
point for CSPs because it's a limit. It's a limit to CSP subscriptions. It's also
it is. Yeah. We can't sell you a dev test subscription,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Uh, Basically, DevTest subscriptions allow you to get free SQL licensing for Azure SQL DB and free Windows licensing for VMs that are non-production. That's really the only special thing about a DevTest subscription. Uh, One thing I'll mention right now, when we're recording this in March of 2026, Azure SQL Database Hyperscale has no licensing fees. So if you're using the Hyperscale tier, you're effectively only paying for the cost of compute. So that's one part of DevTest that's there. Windows VM licensing can be pretty expensive, especially on larger VMs. And that brings us to our next topic, which is the Azure Hybrid benefit. And this is where you can bring your own Windows or SQL Server licenses. SQL Server is kind of interesting because you can apply it to SQL Database or Managed Instance. Do you know remember those conversions off the top of your head? Like isn't Enterprise Edition, like you get 4 cores of general
Yep.
purpose?
Yep. One enterprise license on premises, you get 4 cores of general purpose. If you do business critical, it's 1-to-1.
One core, and then if you have a
Yep.
standard edition license, you get 1 core of general purpose, and nothing for
One, right. Nothing for enterprise.
one slap on the hand for business critical.
which
Yeah.
which that ratio actually helped one of my clients because they had purchased enterprise licenses
Mhm.
on premise, and they have Azure SQL database, and they were looking to make sure that they had enough, and that ratio actually helped reduce their cost
Cool.
very significantly, because they're like, well, hey, it's 1-to-4 because you're in general purpose. You bought X number of enterprise cores, you get X number of general purpose cores in Azure, and they're like, sweet, we saved X number of dollars.
Yeah, and one thing to note that if you're new to SQL Server licensing features and stuff in Azure, for the most part, the enterprise standard split doesn't apply on features. Like general purpose and business critical have the same feature set, except for Hackathon. That's the in-memory LTP. That's the only feature that's specifically tied to general purpose or business critical. Also, you get readable secondaries, but you can get that with Hyperscale. You just have to pay for them. Yeah. The one other thing I wanted to
Well, hang on,
go
hang
ahead.
on. Speaking of hyperscale, you
Hmm.
mentioned NoSQL license. Do you think that that'll change?
At some point in the future, I suspect that will change.
You think it will? Okay.
I have no inside knowledge of that, but at some point there'll be a new CVP of Azure data, and
My only thought to that, and I don't disagree with you. My only thought to that is once you're in hyperscale, you can't move out of it.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
I don't know. I'm sorry. Once you're there for 30 days, right? So if you migrate into it, you have 30 days
yeah.
to either exit the platform or stay there. You stay there beyond 30 days, you're stuck.
I think it might
So
be
my only
45
thought
now,
is,
but yeah, yeah, yeah.
huh? Is it
I
45?
think it might be 45, but
Is it
yeah,
45? Okay. So they changed it. Originally it was
they
30
did.
days.
Yeah, yeah.
So my only thought was that would really suck to be in hyperscale and you can't go anywhere. You can't
John,
move anywhere.
you can take an export.
You, yeah. Tell you what, if your database is bigger than 15 gigs, let me know how that goes for you.
John and I are in this permanent campaign to be able to back up and restore into
Please
Azure
for it.
SQL Database any tier. And Microsoft considers it to be a security risk for reasons I somewhat understand.
I
But
somewhat understand it,
but there's got to be ways around that. And it would be really cool if we could back up. It'd be really cool if we could restore into hyperscale, because hyperscale is a great service, but it would be even cooler if we could take a backup of our hyperscale database and restore it to an on-prem SQL database. If you're using managed instance, you can do that, but your database workload can't be bigger than 16 or possibly 32 gig or terabytes, not gig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Spot VMs.
You
use them?
I've never actually. I've honestly in Azure, I've tried to deploy them a few times and I've never been able to successfully do it. Spot VMs are these like heavily discounted up to 90% VMs for like spare capacity that you could use for batch workloads, CI/CD or stateless processing. I've tried to build, like for various things I was doing, I've tried to build them a few times and I've never been able to get one. It's just like the excess capacity. This was something that was very popular in the early days of AWS, because AWS, I guess, had a lot of capacity early on, and you could get them and hold them for a few hours and like do some machine learning work or something. But yeah, it's not something I've commonly seen, and it's not something that you're going to really integrate into a production workflow.
I always thought that Microsoft could take that capacity back.
They can. that is totally.
I never used it because I never wanted Microsoft to just yank it back without me.
You get to decide how much of a warning you get, up to like 3 minutes, and I think you also get to decide of like how graceful the failures handling, which is obviously going to depend on your workload, but the failure, them yanking your VM from you, but
that would suck, especially for a production workload.
Yeah, I think there are things you could design where it would work okay, but spot VMs have really limited use cases. Even CI/CD, like I wouldn't want my build VMs to go away. That would suck. Like, what if I'm in the middle of a build?
Yeah.
Then I lost the 10 minutes. Yeah.
That would suck.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about reservations tooling. So cost management and billing have some solutions here, and I think Azure Advisor does too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Azure Advisor will give you some recommendations on reservations, purchases, and right sizing to make sure you have the right number of reservations for cores.
In terms of cost management, one of the things you want to be concerned about is reservations will show up as a one-time charge at the beginning of the month. So you want to make sure you're looking at the amortized view, which spreads the cost of reservation across 30 minutes. That's probably the biggest recommendation I have there. And then, of course, tag everything so you can use cost alerts.
Please tag
our next topic here is going to be on Azure policy as it relates to cost management, because I've been wanting to talk about this, because we talk about tagging a lot, and it's really easy for us to tell you to tag. But if you don't have a policy in place, and probably if you're not doing infrastructure as code with that policy in mind, you're not tagging, or you might be tagging because you're a good system administrator, but that other lazy guy or girl on your team, they're not tagging.
Yeah.
or they're using env instead of environment, so your tags aren't consistent. So like you want to do that by policy and infrastructure as code, rather than just encouraging people to tag. Like in Fabric where there's no policy. All right. So just to wrap up, cool talk, reservations and savings plans. Reservations for predictable workloads, savings plans for things that are more flexible. EA negotiated pricing if you're big. But even if you're not big, but you have a decent spend, look to a CSP like DCAC, or just maybe talk to Microsoft. If you're spending a few $1,000,000, you can definitely get an MCA.
Sure.
There are trade-offs. Like I will say, I think the MCA level, there's kind of a trade-off between having a CSP and being an MCA customer. And unless Microsoft's promising you some pretty good discounts, I think a lot of the other benefits of having a CSP, like the extra consulting you get, is probably a better solution. In terms of what you go ahead.
I think the nut of this whole talk is if you're paying retail rates, you're doing cloud wrong.
Completely. Don't pay retail.
Azure and Microsoft gives us plenty of solutions. We talked about them today, several different options on how to save money. I don't know about AWS, but I assume that AWS has some
all,
similar
all
programs.
all these are pretty much the same, and the percentages are pretty much. So
Which makes
it's
sense.
it's very rare. I do a lot of work in this cloud economic space, and it's very rare that you come across something that's priced vastly differently across the clouds. I can think of a couple of things. I don't know them off the top of my head. It's nothing like, it's usually some weird network thing that's like way more expensive in AWS than or Azure than AWS. But like VMs and storage and databases, they're all almost priced exactly the same. Azure or AWS even lets you use Developer Edition now for RDS finally.
Oh, that's nice. Finally.
Yeah. Yeah. So look at reservations. The Azure Advisor does a good job. I think it's overkill. You probably know, unless you're in a huge company, you know what VMs you have and what they're running. Look at that and start there. Look at databases, all those things that are eligible, things you know you're going to have around for a while. You can take advantage of those savings. With
For
that,
sure.
have a great week, and we will have some live episodes. We're going to be at FabCon and MVP Summit in a couple of weeks, and we're going to try to get some people on and have some fun talks.
Heck yeah.
Talk to y'all later.
Like and
Bye.
subscribe.
Yeah, like and subscribe. Bye.
Bye.